one of the things that, I tell a story in the book I wrote, Growing Physician Leaders, about arriving the first day of duty in my tank battalion, 264 Armor in Schweinfurt. And here I was, a brand new second lieutenant out of West Point. I was told to report to my battalion commander. I had just gotten off a flight, had arrived in Frankfurt. A bus had picked all of us up. We had driven down a couple hours on the Autobahn to Schweinfurt, first time seeing the surrounding territory. And my battalion commander, who I went in to see at the time, in the Army, you always call your commander the old man. That's the phrase you use. And I walked in to meet Lieutenant Colonel Dick Barenhausen, and he looked like a kid. He was a probably 34, 35-year-old lieutenant colonel, but he was very young looking, very energetic, very spry. And he introduced herself to me and two other guys, two new second lieutenants who had all arrived on the same day. And he said, "Okay, lieutenants," he said, "your first mission is," and it was about, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon when we arrived there. He said, "Your first mission is to go meet your platoon and find out from your platoon sergeant and your company commander what your wartime trace is and where you would go to defend if we got an alert tonight to go to the border." And he said, "Tomorrow morning at 0600, I will meet you in your assembly area out by where the Soviet main axis is coming into the Schweinfurt." Now, everybody, when they talk about the Cold War, will talk about the Fulda Gap. We were not in the Fulda Gap. We were in a secondary approach called the Meiningen Gap, because the town of Meiningen was in our sector. So within a 4-hour period of time, I had to meet my 19 soldiers, see my 5 different tanks that were in the motor pool at the time, learn who my sergeants were, mount them all up on their tanks, drive the 20 or so miles to our border trace location, set up to see where we would go if the alert went off. And, by 6 o'clock the next morning when my boss showed up, I would have to brief him on my plan. Now you say, wow, that's a lot of stuff for a brand new second lieutenant who was jet lagged coming over from the United States to do. And the point the commander was making was, we may have to go to war tomorrow. So you can't make an excuse of, hey, I just got here, or I don't know my people, or I don't know where I'm supposed to go. You've got to get spun up very quickly. And that was the Army in Europe in the early 70s. And there were constant alerts. There were, I'll share again, my memory is refreshing as we're talking about this, but every unit in US Army Europe had an alert roster. And this is a time before cell phones and computers and all that. So I had 19 soldiers in my platoon. Some of them lived in the barracks. Some of them were married and lived on the economy in Germany. But I had to have a phone list of all of them. And if I got an alert at 2 o'clock in the morning, I would have to call each one of them and say, get to the motor pool. And we had 2 hours to get there, mount up all our equipment, our machine guns, our ammunition, and head toward the border. And that drill of an alert usually occurred at least once a month. And it would always happen 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. It didn't occur during the day. It always occurred when everybody was gone sleeping. So when you start calling people, you're probably going to get at least 3 or 4 of those soldiers who were still drinking downtown or out having a good time or doing whatever. So you would never be sure of getting the soldiers, because the phone, it wasn't a cell phone, it was a phone at their house or their quarters. But we would have to roll to our assembly areas on the border and be prepared to fight. And that was practiced constantly. Now, one more thing. Not only did we have to do this, but our family members had to do it too. So the family members, there was a rule, a standard that you could never have less than a half a tank of gas in your car. And the reason for that was if there was ever a real live alert, and this was practiced every once in a while, not every month, the families had alerts too, where they would pack up in their cars, head toward Frankfurt, where they would do what's called a non-combatant evacuation operation, which we called a NEO, N-E-O, non-combatant evacuation operation. So the families were involved in this too, because we had to get them out of a potential combat zone. And you can imagine, you know, not only the soldiers going off to their tanks, but wives and kids and dogs and parakeets all getting into the cars and heading in the other direction toward Frankfurt. Sure. Those were some of the things of the day at very different.
Crews are harassed by reflecting mirrors in the hands of East German police, and water hoses are played on equipment. Nevertheless, our reporters are able to come up with some remarkable pictures, despite these hazards. Smoke and tear gas bombs sometimes boomerang on the East German troops.
Filled sky all the way to Berlin in the bombers of the 8th United States Army Air Force, the RAF, and the RCAF. Thus, throughout the war, the Stars and Stripes men went to combat, to captivity, and even into the lists headed Killed in Action.